The next item of business is a statement by Fiona Hislop on ferries and ports. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, in this statement I intend to give an update on the Clyde and Hebrides contract, ferry services in the Northern Isles, and to highlight significant progress in key ferry investments for vessels and ports across our lifeline services. We are now approaching the end of the first period of the Clyde and Hebrides ferry services contract following the direct award to CalMac in October last year. These new arrangements are a step change in how services are delivered, bringing flexibility and community focus to the heart of how operations are managed. This includes new key performance indicators, which have been developed with community input and a focus on lived experience. Scottish ministers have embedded the Ferry Community Board within the legal agreements, and I was pleased to see the advert launched to seek a new chair in the near future, and I thank Angus Campbell for his term as chair previously. Ministers and Transport Scotland officials have hugely valued the engagement with the board, and they will continue to play a key role in strategic issues across the network. I have also welcomed my engagement with individual ferry committees in recent weeks. Examples of how CalMac have responded to community asks include extended services on the secondary route to Arran and the Sound of Barra in the winter, bringing added resilience to these islands. The introduction of an enhanced area manager structure is a permanent feature of this new Clyde and Hebrides ferry service contract, and I have heard directly from communities that they want to see those roles strengthened, and I can confirm that Transport Scotland and CalMac are looking at further improvements to support this. MV Glensanach entered the fleet in January 2025 and is expected to return to service for annual overhaul in the next few days. The order for the 7 new ships as part of the small vessel replacement programme was placed in March 2025, and construction is progressing well, and the first vessel is due to be delivered in 2027. And of course, the MV Isle of Islay has now arrived in Scottish waters and is undergoing preparations to enter service on Islay. I will be visiting the vessel tomorrow and would like to take this opportunity to share my thanks and admiration for the crew in undertaking her journey from Turkey, not least of which was the skill and bravery expressed in undertaking a rescue operation north of Morocco en route. Her sister vessel, the Lochendal, is due to follow this summer, further enhancing the service to Islay with her greater capacity adding to that of the Isle of Islay. Also for Islay, investment in upgrading ports, including replacing the life-expired infrastructure, was completed at Kennacraig and Port Askaig last year. And I can announce today that I have approved funding for Port Ellen developments, and I'm pleased to confirm that CMAL will be awarding this contract to be completely redevelop Port Ellen this week. This £107 million project will provide essential additional marshalling area to safely use the full capacity of existing and new vessels, in addition to improving resilience and increasing the efficiency and flexibility around freight operations, supporting communities and the economy of Islay. Work will start in the summer and is expected to complete in early 2029. Now, I would like to now turn to the port of Ardrossan, which the Government is clear will be the primary mainland main port to service the island of Arran. Presiding Officer, I can confirm to the Chamber today that the negotiations around purchase and wider legal agreements have now been concluded and will be signed shortly to confirm the purchase of Ardrossan by CMAL this month. This purchase will secure the port in public ownership to allow us to focus the redevelopment of the facility as the primary mainland port for Arran. I cannot confirm the full details until the commercial deal and related agreements have formally concluded, but my previous updates have been clear that this has been a complex negotiation to bring about wider benefits for our ferry services in the longer term. In the interest of transparency, I can confirm that this process has involved a shareholder direction to the CMAL board to allow the purchase to be concluded. I have also provided written authority to Transport Scotland. We will share the details of this with the NZ and Public Audit Committees shortly, and also publish this in line with previous commitments. There is work to be done to move forward to tender for the port redevelopment, but CMAL has already been considering short-term work to ensure resilient operations whilst the MV Caledonian Isles continues to operate from Ardrossan, and we are committed to funding a 2-port service until the major work starts. I want to thank both the CMAL and PO Ports teams for their work on getting to this point. I also want to add my thanks to the Arran Ferry Committee and the representative on the task force for their input throughout, constantly championing the use of Ardrossan. I will be meeting the task force this evening to discuss the immediate steps following purchase. I now want to move on to further vessel procurement. Presiding Officer, I can announce that it will be expanded upon by the Deputy First Minister in her statement to follow that Ministers propose to include the 2 new vessels for the Sound of Harris and Sound of Barra from the next phase of the Small Vessel Replacement Programme as a direct award to Ferguson Marine as part of a wider suite of publicly funded and directly awarded vessel projects. This proposal is subject to a detailed internal due diligence process that is underway to assess viability, including examination of structural organisation matters and subsidy control. Engagement with the Competition and Markets Authority would also be among the steps required before any formal contract award decisions could be made. Separately, I can also announce that CMAL will now move to the open market competitive procurement of the replacement for the MV Lord of the Isles in the next few weeks, with a view to placing an order with a shipyard later this year. When I met the community and businesses in South Uist last year, I was clear that the business case would be developed this financial year, and this announcement is confirmation of that commitment. Moving to the Little Minch, work on the Little Minch ports was completed last year, and CMAL have now confirmed that the MV Lochmore is expected to be handed over later this year and the MV Claymore early next year, although they will continue to work with the yard to bring these dates forward if possible. The introduction of this new 2-vessel service will bring added capacity and resilience to the Western Isles, as will the investment in the new Lord of the Isles vessel and the next phase of the Small Vessel Replacement Programme. I turn now to services to Orkney and Shetland. The First Minister confirmed when he was in the Northern Isles recently that the peak seasonal fares for Orkney and Shetland Islanders using the Northlink services will be removed from the 26th of March 2026. And eligible island residents will now only need to pay low-season passenger, car and cabin rates all year round. The Scottish Government has also introduced free inter-island travel in the Western Isles and Northern Isles for under-22s on council-run services, and we have extended the voucher system to more of our young people across both of the networks that are the responsibility of Scottish ministers. For the Northern Isles, tomorrow we will launch the prior information notice that is the initial phase in procurement for the next Northern Isles ferry services contract that will be in place from the end of June 2028. Transport Scotland recently published the report on the extensive public consultation exercise that took place last year, and my officials received over 1,100 responses to the consultation, which is substantial for a project of this nature. Work is currently ongoing to refine the specification for the next NIF's contract, and these responses will help inform this process. One of the key messages of the Northern Isles consultation was around vehicle deck capacity and availability of cabins. These needs are well understood by ministers and have informed the development of the new freight flex vessels, which will replace the existing freighters, with capacity for around 200 passengers in peak seasons. The tender process for these vessels is on track, and we expect to announce the award of the contract later this month, subject to concluding the commercial processes. I would note that no UK yard bid for these freight flex vessels, and the size was out with the maximum that could be accommodated at Ferguson Marine. So, Presiding Officer, with our ongoing work in ports and investment in our harbours and vessels, with 11 vessels under construction, 3 in active procurement, and further investment for vessels for Mull and the second phase of SVRP. And with these key announcements today, this Scottish Government is demonstrating our continuing commitment to supporting lifeline ferry services and the island communities and economies that they serve.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after we'll move on to the next item of business. Grateful if members who wish to put a question were to press their request to speak buttons. And I call Sue Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement, and I welcome her remarks regarding community involvement with decision-making and on the investment in Port Ellen, which I know are vital whisky distilleries on Islay, and they were very grateful for that. And while I recognise the commercial sensitivity regarding the purchase of Ardrossan, residents of the town and businesses on Arran were promised this years ago. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide any timelines as to when the Scottish Government expects the harbour to be upgraded and how much has been budgeted for this? And I'm also quite interested in what's not in your statement today, Cabinet Secretary. Perhaps we could get an update on the Glen Rossa and provide more details on when the Glen Sannox is expected to return to full service and not go in for yet more repairs. And with the announcement that the charter for the MV Alfred will be extended yet again, does the Cabinet Secretary think this is value for money, considering taxpayers have spent more money to hire that ferry than it cost Pentland to build it?
All questions through the Chair, please. Cabinet Secretary.
So it's vitally important that we provide ongoing resilience where possible, and I think the deployments that CalMac make and indeed the investment in the MV Alfred is necessary to do so. I did say in my statement that the MV Glen Sannox will return to service in the next few days. That was one of her questions. And in terms of the budget provides for the purchase this financial year and also funding to help with the initial works, but clearly in terms of the spending review, that's where the funding in the ferries and ports line, which you'll notice has been substantially increased compared to previous years, contains the investment for Ardrossan to take place. She says that the purchase of Ardrossan has been planned or promised for years. That is not the case. This was something that I announced to the Parliament barely a year ago, and I have been pursuing with our partners, Transport Scotland, CMAL and with Peel Ports, a solution that allows us to unlock the vital investment that allows that major development, and I'm pleased that she welcomes that decision.
Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I also add my thanks to Angus Campbell for his work on the Communities Board? Presiding Officer, this statement is equivalent to the photo op of the Glen Sannox with painted-on windows. Anyone would think there was an election looming. The statement suggests that the Scottish Government live in a parallel universe. There's no mention that the said MV Glen Sannox is in reality being rebuilt by plundering the MV Glen Rossa for parts. Indeed, we'll soon revert to calling the MV Glen Rossa Hull 802, but it will be that diminished. CalMac's own app today says a third of sailings are subject to disruption. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what she is doing to support the communities suffering those disruptions, and when will the Scottish Government face up to their responsibilities and ensure that communities are properly compensated?
Cabinet Secretary.
So the member obviously has missed the point that for the Western Isles we are about to go into procurement for the MV Lord of the Isles. That will be very welcome indeed. We are also announcing the procurement in terms of direct award of 2 vessels that will be going to Ferguson's. These are things that have been a long time in development and planning, I understood, but the investments that have been taking place, particularly in the ports and harbours across the Clyde and Hebrides services, have been happening throughout the course of this year. This government is committed to investment, and can I say to the member, there are currently a third of the whole Clyde and Hebrides fleet service is being replaced in terms of the procurement and the building as we speak. In terms of support for businesses, I'm very pleased that my colleague Mary Gushan announced the Islands Business Resilience Fund that has benefited a number of islands, and indeed so much so that we have extended that to a further tranche as well. So this government is investing in our islands, is investing in our communities, and I'm just in some sorrow that there wasn't anything in that statement that the Labour Party lead could actually try and support in any way whatsoever.
Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by Jamie Halker-Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today's announcement finally rights the wrong-headed 1992 Tory privatisation of Ardrossan Harbour, an act which ensured that maintenance of this crucial infrastructure was left at the whim of private interests. I am deeply grateful to the Cabinet Secretary and the First Minister for delivering on this issue. Talk is cheap, and there's been much of it, but Scottish ministers are actually delivering for the people of Ardrossan and Arran. Now the harbour is finally being returned to public hands, can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that neglect of the harbour is now a thing of the past, and that going forward it will receive the attention and investment such a key lifeline port both needs and deserves?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I thank the member for his interest. The MSP, Kenneth Gibson for Cunningham North, has long and persistently and indeed quite critically at times made sure that the government knew the importance of the investment in Ardrossan. And his question cuts to the chase of why this is important. We need to purchase support in order to help the wider development of Ardrossan, to support that community as well as to ensure that service to Arran. I'm very conscious that there will be need for support, and that's why I'm continuing the support for and ensuring that there's funding for the two-port service until such times as that major development will be taking place. But I'm very pleased that the Ardrossan task force, of which he is a member, will now be able to focus on the redevelopment of Ardrossan, which is what the communities of both Ardrossan and Arran need.
Ardrossan, to be followed by Stuart McMillan.
The impact of the crisis the SNP have overseen in our ferries fleet has thankfully been lessened by the role played by the Pentland Ferries MV Alfred, although it has meant that the new and larger vessel has been taken away from its home route in Orkney for 3 years now. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm whether there has been any increase in the reported £1 million per month paid to Pentland Ferries to charter the MV Alfred? And given the charter has been repeatedly extended and maybe again, can she tell us definitively that the total charter cost will not exceed the £44.5 million per vessel paid for the new ferries built in Turkey?
Cabinet Secretary. So clearly the arrangement of the MV Alfred is a commercial arrangement with CAMAC. They are responsible for that arrangement. They are also responsible to ensure that we have that consistency of service, and the MV Alfred has been extremely helpful in terms of providing the service that they have. In terms of the cumulative or comparative figures, that's something that CAMAC will be able to provide should the member contact them.
Stuart McMillan, to be followed by Casey Clark.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for this excellent announcement about the direct award of 2 vessels to Ferries Marine. And given the position the UK Government budget has left Scotland in, I am proud that this SNP Government remains committed to continued investment in new vessels and also improving the infrastructure at our ports. In the face of continued demands on the capital budget, what assurances can the Cabinet Secretary provide that this will continue to be a priority for the Scottish Government?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for his support, and he has been a member that has continuously supported his constituency of Inverclyde and the position of Fergus Marine, which will be further elaborated on by the Deputy First Minister in the statement to follow. He makes an important point about seeking security in terms of the funding for future vessels and harbours. That's why the comprehensive spending review is important. Also, the infrastructure and investment pipeline that has been developed along with the investment infrastructure strategy that is currently out for consultation. This all sets a plan, particularly with the Islands Connectivity Plan, that sets out plans of investments for vessels in a continuous and orderly and organised way that take us right up to 2045.
I call Casey Clark, to be followed by Lena Whittam.
After a strong local campaign, the Scottish Government announced in 2017 that the Ardrossan project route would continue and that a redevelopment of Ardrossan Harbour was needed. I welcome the announcement today, but 9 years on, the Cabinet Secretary will appreciate that local people want to know when the port will be fully operational again. So can the Cabinet Secretary advise when the work needed to start a tendering process is likely to start and be completed, when redevelopment work is likely to start, and when the harbour redevelopment could be finished to allow the new ferries to operate?
Cabinet Secretary.
So when I came into post in June 2023, there wasn't prospect of the investment in Ardrossan Harbour because there was a tripartite arrangement, and one of those bodies was a private company, Peel Ports, and obviously any negotiation for development or indeed investment would require their decision-making, their investment, and so therefore the solution that I've come up with, and I came to the Chamber and I've kept the Chamber updated regularly since, was to purchase the port, to put it back into public ownership, something that this government has done but previous Labour governments haven't done since the privatisation by others. Can I say, in terms of her points about investment, it's operational currently, so the port is operational currently. There is short-term work that I think CMAL does want to do to secure that on an immediate basis, and there's funding available to that. The next stages will be the major development to enable the larger vessels to be part of that, and that's where I think the task force and indeed the work of Mr Gibson and others will be vitally important in taking that forward.
I call Elena Whittam to be followed by Edward Boynton.
Islanders should not be restricted by seasonal ferry pricing. Therefore, it is most welcome that in the midst of the continuation of the cost of living crisis under Labour, this SNP government is investing £1.8 million in 2026-27 to remove peak fares on Northern Isle ferries. Can the Cabinet Secretary tell us more about how this decision is expected to benefit island communities?
Cabinet Secretary.
The member is quite right to identify that islanders consistently face increased costs in a whole variety of different areas, and that is why the decision to provide £1.8 million to help tackle the Northern Isles situation, where islanders have had to face peak fares in the summer, has been addressed. And a family of four, for example, with a car and cabin from Shetland could save up to £193 per journey return. That is a considerable amount when families are facing bills and increasing bills. We're also investing in the vessel replacements within 2 new Freight Flex vessels, so that will again help the capacity for islanders. But islanders should not be penalised when they travel, and I'm delighted that not only have we helped support young islanders in the travel, but we're also helping families with this measure.
I call Edward Boynton to be followed by Ariane Burgess.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the purchase of Ardrossan Harbour and the work that's gone into that. I'm going to park for the fact that it should have happened in 2015 when the Glen Sannox was ordered, because we'd ordered a boat that was longer than the pier, which needed lengthening, strengthening, it needs a new terminal, and it needs LNG storage facilities. So before buying it, the Cabinet Secretary must have worked out all the costs for doing that. Could the Cabinet Secretary tell, Presiding Officer, this Parliament what the cost for the repairs will be and when they will be started?
Cabinet Secretary.
So in terms of the different elements, in 2017, I recall I was the Cabinet Secretary for Culture and External Affairs, and I was pursuing that agenda. He, in his capacity as convener of a number of committees, has fully examined at length all those issues, and he might want to dwell in 2017. I'd quite like to dwell in 2016. Oh, he wants to go back to 2015, which is even further. But remember, Peel Ports was is a private organisation, a private company, and indeed, as many harbours are, they're private, the private harbours, and the arrangements have to be made on a commercial basis with them. In terms of the funding for the repairs, there's a difference between repairs and redevelopment. The short-term repairs will be met by the funding that will be transferred in the next few weeks as part of this year's budget, including for the purchase. But in terms of the redevelopment, there are different prices depending on what you want to do in terms of the more expansive work or the work that's required for those vessels indeed. Having said that, I can reassure him that that funding is available in the budgets, in the ferries and ports budgets going forward over the spending review.
I call Ariane Burgess to be followed by Emma Harper.
It's good to hear the Government's development of the ferry fleet, and I welcome the introduction of the free inter-island travel for under-22s and the removal of peak seasonal fares for Orkney and Shetland residents on the North Link services, which I first raised following concerns brought to me by islanders. And I am grateful to the Government for working with me on that issue. But I'm interested in what's not in the statement, the long-promised ferry fare review, specifically on freight charges. A 12-metre truck on an Oban to Craigmuir route is charged £426, yet a motorhome of identical length travels for under 132. This structural inequality is effectively escalating the cost of living for our islanders. Can the Cabinet Secretary commit to bringing forward the long-promised ferry fare review?
Cabinet Secretary.
So the Fares Fare Review already reported some time ago and had reference in there to ferry fares. The issue around freight has to be addressed, and that will be addressed as part of ongoing dialogue and discussions that officials will have with the relevant bodies. But I started my remarks saying we've done something fairly substantial in awarding a direct award for CalMac for these services. It's important those services and the systems bed in. It's as important that the KPIs informed by local communities are bedded in, and also the community needs assessment, which will also address the needs for freight and also for passengers, runs its course for particular routes as well. One of the things that is happening on some routes is that there's an introduction where freight, if they don't show up in terms of their booking, are liable for that payment, and to make sure that that also frees up space for locals as well. So this is a continuous process, which was the whole point of the direct award to CalMac, was to allow it to have a public service ethos as opposed to working to contract.
I call Emma Harper to be followed by Jamie Green.
Presiding Officer, it is hugely welcome that this SNP government is making record investment across public transport in 2026 and 2027, as well as the investment for Ardrossan in response to Kenneth Gibson's question. Can the Cabinet Secretary further expand on how this investment will be used to deliver wider ferry service improvements and port upgrades?
Cabinet Secretary.
I have set out in my statement a number of areas. I think we should emphasise that in terms of the number of vessels, that's a third of the whole CalMac fleet that will be replaced. What doesn't get as much attention is the ports and harbours. Obviously, there's been work, particularly on the Little Minch, to enable improvements there. There's an ongoing series of works that will take place in different ports. Gassy, that, funnily enough, wasn't mentioned by Rhoda Grant, is another example of development work that will be helping, particularly on the Western Isles. So in relation to that investment, that will continue. That's part of the pipeline that is more publicly available in terms of what we'll be doing more generally within the wider capital context. But I think in the basis of what has happened, particularly in the last 14 years, years of austerity, years where capital budgets were severely constrained with emergency budgets, taking capital out of the Scottish Government's budget, the fact we are able to plan and plot a route forward that sees the announcements today and the investment, I would hope, is something that everybody in the Chamber can welcome.
I call Jamie Green to be followed by Bill Cook.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the move in taking this port into public ownership. I think it's a good move, and I also commend the efforts of the local campaigners who have been fighting for this for some years. But the reality is that Ardrossan remains a difficult place to do business. There are still problems on services to Broddock from Ardrossan. Today and tomorrow, all services are cancelled to Broddock because of technical issues on the MV Caledonian Isles. And all the while, this leaves local Ardrossan businesses bereft of footfall and of cash. So I am going to make once again a plea to the Cabinet Secretary, as I have done before, to extend the Island Business Resilience Fund to Ardrossan businesses, but also to ask if CMAL, the new owners of the harbour, will undertake any more immediate remedial work on the port to make it more reliable, because we simply can't wait a number of years for the full redevelopment of the harbour.
Cabinet Secretary.
So I thank the member for his welcome of the purchase of Ardrossan. I think the Ardrossan economy in North Ayrshire has challenges more widely, and I think that this hopefully will give a bit of hope and confidence that there's investment that can take place that will give a long-term sustainable future for Ardrossan as a port. But that's why I think the work of the task force and working with North Ayrshire Council in particular is going to be really important, because there'll be more that has to be done to ensure that that investment is there. He's correct to identify that there's been some technical issues that has meant that the Ardrossan-Broddock route is not operating currently, but we are, as I said, expecting vessels that will help support that in terms of the redeployment in coming days and weeks as well. In terms of Ardrossan, the island, and it's in the name, Island Business Resilience Fund, we have had to prioritise those that have had the most degree of disruption in terms of islands, and that was initially at a 15% reduction, then a 10%, and we've expanded it to more islands, which is to be welcomed. But he makes an important point about what will happen to Ardrossan in the future. And I've made clear, although it will be for another minister, because this probably is the last statement I will make in this chamber, but it will be for another minister. And my advice is that at the time of that major development, then there's going to be need for business resilience for the town of Ardrossan. On his point about the immediate remedial work, yes, the answer is yes, and I was quite clear about that, which is when on actual asset transfer, that will be one of the first things that happens, is immediate work that can help support the resilience of that port.
I think I can squeeze in 2 more questions, but I need succinct questions and succinct answers. Bill Kidd, to be followed by Graham Simpson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When developing the Scottish Government's Vessels and Ports Plan last year, stakeholders highlighted reliability and resilience as key priorities for vessel and port investment. Can the Cabinet Secretary tell us about how the Scottish Government is working to deliver on these priorities?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, that's clear that reliability and resilience is really important. Some of those things in terms of resilience, and I come back to this, is the impact of severe weather and continuous severe weather. That's part of what we're going to have to deal with. So therefore, resilience of ports is going to be increasingly important. And that's why I hope in my statement I've given as much attention to ports as I have done to vessels. And in terms of reliability, it does mean that there has to be interoperability between vessels to cover for different vessels at different times. And that's what we've been doing with the procurement, so there'll be further interoperability between different vessels that can berth at different harbours to help that resilience.
And I call Graham Simpson.
Thank you. I'm interested in the cost of redeveloping Ardrossan, and I heard the Cabinet Secretary say there could be different figures, but because she's a diligent Cabinet Secretary, I know she will have a budget in mind. Can she tell us what the range of figures are?
Cabinet Secretary. The range of figures are what's covered in the provision for the budget and the comprehensive spending review. But as he will know, with any commercial tender, if I was to suggest how much that would be, I might not get the best value for the public purse in securing that best value for public investment. So I can give him a reassurance that it is there, but also if he can give me some understanding that there will have to be that competitive tender to secure the best value for that development work.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the statement. There will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business.